The gold pocket watch felt impossibly heavy in Esther Blackwood's gnarled fingers as she checked it for the 5th time during our wedding ceremony. I never planned on marrying an 88-year-old woman, but with my ranch 3 days from foreclosure and debt collectors circling like vultures, I'd convinced myself this was just business, a desperate man's last resort, standing beside her at the altar of redemption's only church. I avoided the judging eyes of townsfolk who'd come to witness Hope Morgan's final surrender. When Reverend Davis pronounced us married and invited me to kiss my bride, Esther raised her hand to stop me cold. "Not yet," she announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "There are conditions my husband must understand first." Her eyes, suddenly sharp beneath their clouded surface, fixed on mine with an intensity that turned my stomach to stone. "You have no idea what you've just inherited," she whispered, snapping the watch shut with finality. I'd entered this arrangement believing I was using her for financial salvation. But the woman I thought I was manipulating had just revealed she held all the cards, and she was about to play them. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories connect people from all around the world. The wedding guests whispered among themselves, but not about the bride's white dress or the groom's nervous hands. They stared at the pocket watch the old woman clutched during the entire ceremony, its gold surface catching the afternoon light as she checked it every few minutes. Hope Morgan stood at the altar beside 88-year-old Esther Blackwood, wondering why a woman about to gain a husband seemed more concerned with counting time than celebrating. The Reverend's words felt hollow in the small chapel as Hope glanced down at his bride. Her fingers traced the watch's surface with practiced precision, and for a moment her clouded eyes sharpened with an intensity that made his stomach turn, when Lawrence Coleman, the lawyer who had arranged this union, stepped forward with the marriage documents. Esther snapped the watch shut and looked directly at Hope. "You have no idea what you've just inherited," she whispered, her voice carrying a weight that silenced the murmuring crowd. Hope's ranch had been 3 days from foreclosure when Coleman approached him with the proposal, a simple arrangement. The lawyer had explained Esther needed a husband for legal reasons involving her estate, and Hope needed money to save his land. She was old, frail, and unlikely to live much longer. The inheritance would solve all his problems. But standing here now, watching her steady gaze and the way she handled that pocket watch like it contained secrets, Hope realized he had walked into something far more complex than a business transaction. The woman beside him didn't look like someone preparing to die. She looked like someone preparing for war. "Kiss your bride," the Reverend announced. But Esther raised her hand to stop Hope from leaning down. "Not yet," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "There are conditions he must understand first." Coleman's face went pale. This wasn't part of the plan they had discussed. The lawyer stepped closer, his voice urgent and low. "Mrs. Blackwood, we agreed the ceremony would be simple." Esther smiled, and Hope saw something dangerous flicker behind her aged features. "Coleman, you arranged for a husband, not a puppet. If Hope wants access to my fortune, he'll need to prove he deserves it." She turned to face the confused congregation, still gripping that mysterious pocket watch. "This marriage comes with a test, one that begins tonight." Hope felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Every person in that chapel could sense that something fundamental had just changed. But none of them understood what. The woman he thought he was manipulating had just revealed she held all the cards, and she was about to play them. Through the windows of Redemption's only church, Hope could see his struggling ranch in the distance. the drought-parched fields and thin cattle a constant reminder of his desperation. He had entered this arrangement believing it was his last chance at salvation. Now he wasn't so sure what he'd gotten himself into or whether he would survive it. The chapel emptied quickly after Esther's announcement. Guests filed out with hurried whispers and backward glances. Hope remained frozen at the altar, watching his new wife fold the marriage certificate with deliberate care before tucking it inside her coat pocket alongside that damned watch. Coleman paced behind them, his polished shoes clicking against the wooden floor like a countdown timer. "Mrs. Blackwood, this is highly irregular," the lawyer protested, his voice strained. "We had an agreement, a simple ceremony, a simple arrangement." Esther adjusted her black shawl and fixed Coleman with a stare that could cut glass. "You had an agreement, Coleman. I had a plan." The carriage ride to Blackwood Manor passed in suffocating silence. Hope gripped the brass key Esther had slipped into his palm while Coleman sat across from them, staring out of the window with the expression of a man watching his carefully laid plans crumble. Esther hummed softly to herself, occasionally checking her pocket watch as if timing something crucial. When they arrived at the sprawling mansion, Hope understood why Coleman had been so eager to arrange this marriage. The house commanded the valley like a fortress, its wraparound porches and towering windows speaking of wealth beyond anything he had imagined. His own ranch, visible in the distance across the rolling hills, looked like a child's toy by comparison. "Impressive, isn't it?" Esther observed, noting his wide-eyed stare. 40 years of careful investments and shrewd business decisions built all of this. She paused at the front steps, turning to face him directly. "Of course, it wasn't always mine." Coleman cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps we should discuss the financial arrangements before exploring any family history." "Family history?" Hope's voice cracked slightly. "What family history?" Esther ignored Coleman's increasingly frantic signals and led them through the front door into a grand foyer dominated by oil paintings of stern-faced men and elegant women. But it was the portrait at the top of the stairs that made Hope's breath catch in his throat. The man in the painting shared his dark hair, his strong jaw, even the scar above his left eyebrow that Hope had inherited. Handsome man, wasn't he? Esther's voice carried a note of old sadness. "Matthew Morgan, my first husband." The key slipped from Hope's fingers and clattered on the marble floor. Coleman rushed to retrieve it, but Esther was faster despite her age. She held the key up to the light, streaming through the stained glass windows, and Hope could see intricate engravings etched into its surface. "My father's brother was named Matthew," Hope whispered, his voice barely audible. "I know," Esther replied simply. "I was there when your father received word of his disappearance. I held your mother's hand at the memorial service." She started climbing the stairs, each step deliberate and measured. "I was also there the night your uncle made the choice that changed everything." Coleman grabbed Hope's arm, his grip desperate. "Don't listen to her. The old woman's mind isn't what it used to be. These are the fantasies of someone who's lived too long with too many regrets." But Hope shook off the lawyer's grip and followed Esther up the stairs, past portraits of people who looked increasingly familiar the higher they climbed. At the landing, she stopped before a heavy oak door marked with the same intricate patterns that decorated the brass key. "Your uncle stood in this exact spot 30 years ago," Esther said, placing her hand on the door handle. "He had the same choice you have now. Open the door and learn the truth, or walk away and live with questions that will haunt you forever." She held out the key to him again. He chose to walk away, and it destroyed him. From somewhere deep within the house came the sound of footsteps, rapid and approaching. Someone else was here. Someone who apparently didn't want this door opened. The footsteps belonged to a woman in her 30s, with Esther's sharp eyes and Matthew's stubborn jaw. She appeared at the top of the stairs, breathing heavily. Her riding dress dusty from what must have been a desperate journey to reach the house before this moment could unfold. "Grandmother, step away from that door," she commanded, her voice carrying authority despite her obvious exhaustion. "And you," she pointed at Hope, "put down that key and walk out of this house before you destroy what little peace this family has left." Esther smiled with genuine affection. "Serena, my dear, I wondered when you would arrive." She checked her pocket watch again, right on schedule as always. "You planned this," Serena accused, her eyes darting between Esther and the locked door. The marriage, the timing, even having Coleman find him specifically. She turned to Hope with undisguised hostility. "Do you have any idea what you've walked into?" Hope studied the family resemblance between the two women, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place in his mind. "You're Matthew's daughter, my cousin." Coleman, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly stepped forward with renewed confidence. "This is exactly why we should handle these revelations carefully. Family reunions can be emotional, but legal matters require clear heads and proper documentation." "Legal matters?" Serena laughed bitterly. "Coleman, you fool! There are no legal matters here." "There never were." She pulled a folded document from her coat and threw it at his feet. "Your precious marriage contract is worthless. Grandmother has been legally dead for 3 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Hope stared at the document, then at Esther, who continued smiling as if Serena had just announced the weather. "Dead?" Hope's voice came out as a croak. "Declared dead after disappearing during a hunting trip," Serena confirmed. "The estate has been in legal limbo ever since. Coleman knew this when he approached you. He's been using grandmother's assumed identity to access funds that legally belong to the estate." Coleman's face cycled through several colors before settling on gray. That's not... The situation is more complex than you understand." Esther finally spoke, her voice steady and amused. "Oh, Coleman, did you really think I didn't know about your little scheme?" She reached into her coat and produced a thick envelope. "I've been watching you embezzle from my accounts for months, every forged signature, every fraudulent withdrawal, every desperate attempt to maintain the illusion that you were in control." She handed the envelope to Hope. "Inside, you'll find detailed records of Coleman's theft, along with evidence that will send him to prison for a very long time." Her eyes never left the lawyer's face. "Unless, of course, he agrees to return every stolen penny and disappear from our lives forever." Coleman's composure finally cracked. "You can't prove anything. A dead woman's word carries no weight in court." "Perhaps not," Esther agreed cheerfully. "But Serena isn't dead, and neither is the private investigator I hired to document your activities." She gestured toward the stairs, where a tall man in a dark coat now stood, holding a leather portfolio thick with papers. Hope realized that every person in this hallway had been playing a game he didn't understand, following rules he had never learned. The key in his hand suddenly felt less like an opportunity and more like a weapon pointed directly at his chest. "The question now," Esther continued, "is whether you still want to open that door and learn why your uncle really disappeared, or if you'd prefer to leave with the comfortable lies you've believed all your life." But as she spoke, Hope noticed something that made his blood run cold. The investigator wasn't looking at Coleman with the satisfaction of a man who had completed his job. He was looking at Hope with the expression of someone who had just recognized a wanted criminal. The investigator descended the stairs with measured steps. His portfolio clutched against his chest like armor. When he reached the landing, he studied Hope's face with the intensity of a man comparing it to a wanted poster burned into his memory. "Marcus Webb," Esther said, by way of introduction. "I hired him to investigate Coleman's financial activities, but it seems he's discovered something else entirely." She turned to Webb with raised eyebrows. "Care to share what has you looking at my new husband as if he's about to bolt?" Webb opened his portfolio and withdrew a yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Ranch Hand Wanted for Questioning in Cattle Rustling Ring." Below it was a sketch that bore an unmistakable resemblance to Hope, though the man in the drawing appeared older and harder around the eyes. "This was published 3 weeks ago," Webb said, his voice neutral but watchful. "The description matches you perfectly, Mr. Morgan." Serena snatched the clipping from Webb's hands, studying it carefully. "This is ridiculous. Hope was working his own ranch 3 weeks ago. I've seen him there myself." She looked up sharply. "Haven't I?" But Hope's silence stretched too long, and the doubt in Serena's voice grew stronger with each passing second. Coleman, sensing an opportunity to regain control of the situation, stepped forward with renewed confidence. "Well, the lawyer said, smoothing his coat. "It appears our blushing groom has been less than honest about his recent activities." He smiled coldly at Esther. "I believe this changes the nature of our arrangement considerably." Esther studied Hope's face, searching for something only she knew how to recognize. "The cattle rustling charges," she said slowly. "They involve stolen livestock from the Harrington Ranch, don't they?" Hope's jaw tightened. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because the Harrington Ranch was originally Morgan land," Esther replied. "Your uncle sold it to pay gambling debts 2 months before he disappeared. The new owners renamed it, but the brand on those stolen cattle still carries your family mark." The brass key felt burning hot in Hope's palm as the implications hit him. "You're saying someone has been stealing cattle and making it look like I did it." Webb flipped to another document in his portfolio. "The thefts began exactly 3 weeks after Coleman first approached you about the marriage arrangement. Someone wanted to ensure you were desperate enough to accept any offer of financial salvation." Coleman's confident smile faltered. "That's preposterous. I had nothing to do with cattle theft." "Perhaps not directly," Esther agreed. "But you needed Hope desperate, didn't you? Desperate enough to marry an old woman without asking too many questions? Desperate enough to become your unwitting accomplice in stealing from my estate." She walked to one of the hallway windows and gazed out toward Hope's ranch in the distance. "The question is, who convinced you that I was dead? Who provided the forged documents that made you believe you could access my accounts? And who orchestrated the cattle thefts to ensure Hope would be in exactly the right frame of mind to accept your proposal?" Serena followed her grandmother's gaze and went rigid. "There are riders approaching the house, at least 6 of them coming fast." Hope moved to the window and felt his stomach drop. The lead rider wore a sheriff's badge that glinted in the afternoon sun, and the men behind him had the hard look of a posse that meant business. "They've come for you," Webb said quietly. "Someone tipped them off about your location." Esther checked her pocket watch one final time, then snapped it shut with an air of finality. "Perfect timing," she murmured, "though I suspect they're not here just for Hope." As the riders drew closer, Hope could see that one of them carried shackles. and another held what appeared to be multiple arrest warrants. But Coleman's face had gone completely white, suggesting he knew something about this approaching confrontation that the others didn't. "Grandmother," Serena whispered urgently, "whatever's behind that door needs to stay locked, at least until we understand who we can trust." But Esther was already turning the key in the oak door, and the sound of it unlocking echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. The door swung open to reveal not a room, but a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. Esther retrieved a lantern from a wall hook and lit it with steady hands, casting dancing shadows across stone walls that stretched deeper than the house's foundation should have allowed. "This tunnel was built during the territorial wars," she explained. "Starting down the steps, it connects to 3 different exit points across the valley, including one that emerges near your ranch." She paused to look back at Hope. "Your uncle used it frequently during the final months before he vanished." The sound of horses grew louder outside, accompanied by shouted orders and the creak of leather. Webb positioned himself at the hallway window, keeping watch while the others descended into the tunnel. Coleman hesitated at the entrance, clearly torn between following them and facing whatever waited with the approaching posse. "Come along, Coleman," Esther called from the stairs. "I believe you'll find this educational." The tunnel opened into a stone chamber lined with wooden crates and filing cabinets. Esther set the lantern on a central table and began opening drawers with practiced efficiency. The documents she withdrew painted a picture that made Hope's head spin with its complexity. Your uncle discovered that someone was systematically buying up land throughout the valley, using fraudulent deeds and forged documents, Esther explained, spreading the papers across the table. The same person who convinced him to sell the Harrington property for far less than its true value. Serena examined a map marked with red X's across dozens of properties. The pattern shows someone trying to control water rights to the entire region. Whoever owns these parcels could decide which ranches survive and which ones fail. Hope studied his uncle's handwriting on several of the documents. He was investigating this. That's why he disappeared. He was threatened. He was threatened, Esther corrected. Told that if he continued his investigation, his family would pay the price. So, he staged his own death and went into hiding, hoping to protect you while gathering enough evidence to expose the conspiracy. Coleman's voice came from the stairway, tight with fear. "The sheriff's at the front door. He's asking questions about harboring fugitives." Webb appeared at the top of the stairs. 3 of his men are circling the house. They know about the tunnel system. Esther pulled a final document from the bottom drawer, and Hope's world tilted on its axis. It was a partnership agreement signed 30 years ago between someone named Victor Harrington and the Territorial Land Office. The signature on the document belonged to the current sheriff. "Sheriff Morrison has been part of this from the beginning," Esther said. "He's not here to arrest you for cattle rustling. He's here to silence anyone who might expose what really happened to your uncle." The footsteps above them grew more urgent, accompanied by the sound of doors slamming open as the posse searched the house. Serena grabbed several of the most damaging documents and stuffed them inside her coat. "There's something else," she whispered, pointing to a small leather journal tucked behind the filing cabinet. "Look at the dates." Hope opened the journal to find his uncle's final entries. The last one, dated just 3 days ago, made his blood run cold. Hope has taken the bait. Esther will spring the trap tomorrow. Harrington won't see it coming. Esther smiled as she watched him read. "Your uncle isn't dead. Hope, he's been living in the 3rd tunnel exit, waiting for exactly the right moment to expose everyone involved in stealing his land." She checked her pocket watch again. He should be arriving at the sheriff's office with 30 years of evidence right about now. The sound of splintering wood echoed from above as the posse broke down doors in their search. But Esther seemed completely unconcerned as she extinguished the lantern and headed toward the far end of the chamber. "Time to go," she announced cheerfully. "We have a conspiracy to unravel and a family to reunite." As they moved deeper into the tunnel system, Hope couldn't shake the feeling that even this revelation was just another layer in a game whose true purpose he still didn't understand. But for the first time since he'd agreed to Coleman's desperate proposal, he felt something unexpected stirring in his chest. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even anger at being manipulated. It was hope, the very thing his parents had named him for, and the very thing he'd lost until this moment. In the end, what we inherit is rarely what we expect. The debts we believe define us often mask the true legacies waiting to be claimed. Sometimes, desperate choices lead not to escape, but to confrontation with buried truths and forgotten justice. The land remembers what people choose to forget. Water rights and property lines drawn on paper cannot erase the deeper claims of family and community. When corruption takes root, it spreads through invisible channels beneath the surface, much like the hidden passages running beneath seemingly solid ground. Perhaps true wealth is measured not in acres or dollars, but in the courage to uncover what others have buried, in the patience to wait decades for justice, in the wisdom to recognize that some inheritances come with responsibilities rather than privileges. The pocket watches we carry mark more than hours. They track the time between injustice and its remedy, between desperate bargains and unexpected redemptions. In the vast territory between despair and hope lies the most valuable land of all, the moral ground on which we choose to stand. Thank you for joining us for today's story. If it resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective enriches our storytelling community. Don't forget to subscribe and follow our channel for more tales of redemption, justice, and the complex bargains that shape our lives. Until next time.